Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is understanding the Greys. With me is Dr. Jason Georgiani, philosopher and author of Prometheus and Atlas. His other titles include World State of Emergency, Lovers of Sophia, and Novel Folklore. Welcome once again, Jason.
Great to be with you again, Jeffrey.
We've talked previously about my book, The PK Man, in which I did a 10-year study of Ted Owens, who had a relationship he described with extra-dimensional beings he called Tweeter and Twitter, who were like, in his description, they're pure energy beings, but if they were to take a form, they would be like human-sized beings that more or less resemble praying mantises. And that's a little bit related to our topic today of the Greys.
Well, it's more than a little related, although I was going to sneak it in. But now that you've thrown it out there up front, let me say that, yes, these praying mantis-like beings appear in Whitley Strieber's account of his experiences with the Greys in Communion.
He's written other books about it as well, not just Communion.
That's right. Yeah, actually, the praying mantis beings, I think they become even more prominent in Breakthrough, which is the third of the series of books he wrote about his close encounter experiences. But at any rate, the point is that I have compared Communion to The Blind Owl, novella by the Persian literary figure Sadegh Hedayat in my text Novel Folklore. The last chapter of that, called Starblood, is a comparison of Whitley Strieber's Communion with some of the themes in The Blind Owl. And you see these insect-like beings in Communion. And what's interesting is that it's not the only place that they appear together with the Greys. An artist by the name of David Huggins had experiences around the same time as Whitley Strieber, and I'm not aware that these two individuals had encountered each other's work. And Huggins, in his paintings of his encounters with the Greys, has a repeating theme of, in particular, two insect-like beings, praying mantis-like beings who appear with the Greys. And I think what's going on here could be illuminated by Frederick Myers' idea of the imaginal. Frederick Myers, the late 19th century pioneer of parapsychology.
Author of Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death, published in 1903, a great classic not only of parapsychology and psychical research, but of psychology itself.
Yes, Whitley Strieber adopts Myers' idea of the imaginal, and he contemplates whether the visitors, as he calls them, could be expressions of the imaginal force of human evolution, as Myers described it. The idea of the imaginal comes from the word imago, which is the perfected form of an insect. In other words, the butterfly as compared to the caterpillar before it's inside a chrysalis. So Myers believed that there was a psychical dimension to human evolution, and that people with extraordinary abilities were what he called preverts, not perverts, but preverts. They are heralds of future stages of human evolution. And so the idea in Communion is that the Greys may be inviting a metamorphosis of humanity in its larval state, and that they may represent human consciousness in a more evolved form, addressing us from out of the future.
And I suppose it's fair to say for any of our viewers who don't know that the conventional interpretation of the Greys, that these are aliens from outer space who come visit the Earth in flying saucers and sometimes visit people at night and abduct them, bring them aboard a spaceship and perform various kinds of sometimes surgical operations or sexual encounters or other strange encounters. And in Communion, Whitley Strieber describes what almost might be considered a spiritual or perhaps even romantic experience.
Most definitely, to the point where he discusses feelings of guilt in relation to his wife whenever he's with this gray being who he always describes in feminine terms and who he compares to the archetypes of Ishtar and Kali. So yes, the conventional interpretation of the Greys is that they're quote-unquote space aliens.
Yeah. Like the little green men that were referred to before Whitley Strieber.
And they come in two forms, including little men, who are actually a lot more like robots. They don't appear to be individual human being or humanoid beings. Yeah. They're more like drones. But then there are these taller Greys who are creatures that are more humanoid in nature, although they have aspects to their morphology that evoke both reptiles and insects. Like, for example, they have talons, and I think their feet are sort of bird-like or reptile-like in nature. So there's a suggestion that perhaps some kind of genetic splicing or hybridization has taken place, that humanity is, or some humanoid form of life has integrated the genes of other creatures into its genome.
Well, by evoking these archetypal images of the goddesses and so on, and not Whitley Strieber, but Frederick Myers' work on the imaginal, you're suggesting a whole other interpretation consistent with Jacques Vallée's view of aliens and UFOs, and that is that to understand them fully, we need to look into the folklore and mythological literature of humanity, because these beings have been with us in many different forms for a very long time.
Well, I discussed this subject with Jacques Vallée one night at his home in San Francisco. And, Jacques made a very keen observation that it makes no sense for these beings to be collecting genetic material from us for the sake of carrying out some kind of hybridization or genetic engineering project. It would be sufficient for them to land at a facility where they had access to blood banks and databases of sperm banks or something like that, where they could collect a large amount of human genetic material of a great variety to use in whatever experiments that they're engaged in. So it seems to me that all of this imagery in the close encounter phenomenon, these experiences that people have of undergoing bizarre experiments, often with a kind of erotic quality to them, are probably symbolic in nature, and that there is some kind of creation at work, but it's a creation that involves a metamorphosis of humanity, including on the psychical level, or perhaps especially on the psychical level. And in my conversation with Jacques Vallée, we were discussing an idea that is at the core of his book, Passport to Magonia, namely that the beings in the close encounter phenomenon, or at least some subset of them, and I think particularly the Greys, are addressing us from out of the human future. They are not visitors from another planet, although presumably in the future humanity will have colonized many other planets, so calling them extraterrestrials is not necessarily false. But we miss the point, which is that they are emissaries from the human future. And if you pay attention, the devil's in the details here. If you pay attention to the details of these experiences that are recounted by people who have engaged with the Greys, it seems that is a failed human future, and they're here to remedy some catastrophe. So what I suggest in novel folklore is that these beings are attempting to alter the developmental trajectory of humanity. They are attempting to affect a metamorphosis in humanity while it is still in a larval state before it becomes the imago, proverbially. And so I think, again, this insect imagery that we see associated with the Greys in these close encounter experiences has something to do with the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. And what's going on is the perfected form of the insect, as it were, is trying to affect our development in the chrysalis so that we wind up becoming something other, and I would say something more, something with more potential, something that has a greater capacity for life and creation than they wound up becoming.
Well, one of my former mentors, who I've spoken about in other segments of New Thinking Aloud, Arthur M. Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, was deeply interested in alien encounters. And he had developed a theory of everything. He took the periodic table of the elements and tried to apply it to everything. And what he would say is that modern human beings, such as ourselves, are to the human kingdom, to what we might be, as the clam stands in relationship to the animal kingdom.
And I think that's very much the idea at the core of communion and Strieber's work in general. There's also a shamanic element to these encounters. In communion, and this is one of the points of comparison between communion and the blind owl in my book, Novel Folklore. In communion, Strieber talks about how this gray, feminine being that he is involved with manifests in the form of an owl. That in effect this being is a shapeshifter who appears as an owl. And of course the owl is a symbol of wisdom associated with the goddess Athena often.
Yes.
Also associated with Lilith. And the owl has been used by the Illuminati and other secret societies, as a symbol of wisdom.
Now let's step back for a moment and talk about Lilith.
Yeah.
I think some viewers will have no idea who Lilith is.
Well, according to folklore, Adam's first and very rebellious wife before the creation of Eve, who was supposed to be obedient, but evidently was seduced by the serpent into seeking knowledge.
And later became associated with a deity as...
Who?
Lilith.
Well, Lilith... refused to submit to Jehovah and became a demoness figure in Jewish folk religion.
Okay. In other words, she didn't just vanish.
No, she's associated with the night, though, and night terrors, and of course these experiences happen at night.
Yeah.
And there's a long precedent for this in folklore of visitations by incubi and succubuses and incubuses, and this is a subject that is central to Jacques Vallée's study of folklore and the close encounter phenomena.
And the night terror is an experience often where people become paralyzed at night, which seems to accompany these visitations from the Greys. The person who is in bed and is awakened by the Greys and presumably taken somewhere outside of their home, they have no capacity to resist.
There is a surrender of the will that's associated with this, and actually Strieber makes a lot out of this in Communion.
Yeah.
What this surrender of will felt like, and the kind of ecstasy involved in it, actually. And again, it's part of the erotic quality of his encounter with this being. In David Huggins' paintings of his encounters with the Greys, there's one woman in particular that he is predominantly involved with and that he has a child with. But the majority of these Grey beings are also women. Except it's very curious that, so far as I've seen, this painter never noticed, all of these women are wearing masks. They're not like some alien creatures. They are women wearing the mask that we've associated ever since the cover of Communion with the gray alien. And, Whitley Strieber's narrative was translated into a screenplay and filmed.
Yes.
There was a film of Communion, I think around 1989 or so. And from what I hear, Whitley Strieber hates it. But I love it. I think it's a surrealist masterpiece. And there's one scene in it in particular where Christopher Walken, who plays Whitley Strieber, is inside of wherever the Greys take him. It's presumptuous to say it's a flying saucer. And he's sitting down on the ground in front of the faces of the Greys.
Yes.
And he picks one of them up. And it's like a mask. And he looks through the eye hole of the mask and then holds the mask in front of his own face.
Yeah. That may be a very important clue because, as you say, they have a shape-shifting quality, and it may be that for reasons having to do with our own psychology, the image of the little gray alien is suitable for them, but it may be some other principle at work entirely.
And they appear differently in Whitley Strieber's writings. Years before he recollected all of his close encounter experiences, he wrote a horror novel called The Wolfen, and it is about shamanic shape-shifting. It's about some kind of occult terrorist group called the Götterdämmerung, and they are able to shapeshift and manifest in this world as wolves or wolf-like men.
Yeah.
The Wolfen, he calls them. And I think these Wolfen, and Strieber has admitted this himself, he believes that these Wolfen are a subconscious presaging of the Greys.
Well, it's interesting because we keep coming back to Whitley Strieber, and he's had such a powerful cultural impact because he drew these aliens with large almond-shaped eyes, gigantic eyes, and now that has become a stereotype you see almost everywhere.
That's right, and it's been interpreted as the quintessential face of the alien.
Yeah.
But if you pay close attention to Strieber's own writing, not only in Communion, but in other subsequent works where he details these experiences, it's very questionable that these are alien beings. I'm going to give you one example. In Transformation, which is the book following Communion, he describes being with these Greys on a planet, a desert-like planet, where there's a 3 million year old university. And the university is in the style of like adobe buildings, the old American Southwest, where we are right now, adobe buildings with mosaics in them. And it's in a state of ruin, right? And then there's also this arch there, which he says the Greys tell him that this is a monument to the achievement of the scholars. But it's like the St. Louis Arch. And my impression reading this account of him walking up to this university and the various interactions that take place and the environment he's describing there is that this planet is not some alien planet. It's Earth in the future, even though there are two suns in the sky. There's a very bright sun that's our sun, our current sun, and there's another dimmer one. And my guess is that this 3 million year old university is a university that exists on Earth in the future, or at least its ruins do, in our solar system at a time when there's a second sun. Whether that's the planet Jupiter that has become supermassive for whatever reason and collapsed into a dwarf sun, or whether, as some people believe, there is another solar system with its own set of planets in a kind of intersecting orbit with our solar system. And that occasionally a second sun appears in the sky of the Earth over very long intervals of time.
Very interesting indeed. Well, it's intriguing to me that Whitley Strieber has become such a powerful force in the generation of this archetype. Earlier we were talking about how the goddess Shakti is sometimes thought of as the power behind all creation, and it may be that Whitley Strieber, in his encounter with the Greys, has become himself imbued with an enormous creative power here.
I do believe that. And, that creative power has also been central to my work. In fact, I'll reveal to the viewers the significance of the last lines of Prometheus and Atlas, which are one of the esoteric keys that I left in that work to unlock its actual meaning.
And I ought to say, parenthetically, I regard that work as your masterpiece to date.
Hopefully I'll outdo it someday.
Your other works are very good and very interesting, but Prometheus and Atlas is a magnum opus.
Yeah, well, you have to read novel folklore. So, At the last, in the last lines of Prometheus and Atlas, last couple of sentences, I say that what is demanded of us is the perseverance of an Atlas and the daring of a Prometheus. Yeah. Mankind is about to be gifted with a new world, but only if we can bear it, only if we can steal it.
Yes.
And those words are very carefully chosen. First of all, they're a reference to what Colonel Corso tells us in The Day After Roswell.
Philip Corso.
Yeah, about the message of the Greys to the United States government. In The Day After Roswell, Corso recounts that allegedly when the U.S. government asked the Greys what was on offer, they said a new world, if you can take it. And if you can take it means both if you can bear it, if you can tolerate it, but also if you can steal it from us. And this is the imagery of Atlas and of Prometheus. So, and then also when I say gifted, within mankind is about to be gifted with a new world, in German the word gift means poison.
Oh.
So it's the idea that this could kill us. If we can't take it, this encounter could kill us. But if we can become something greater than what we are and engage these beings in the right modality, we will inherit a world from them that is greater than our own.
I believe it was Nietzsche who said that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
And I think that's exactly what's going on with these Greys. They are trying to transform us into something not only greater than what we are, but into beings stronger than they are, because they are refugees from a failed future human civilization.
Well, there's also a great deal to be said, and Jacques Vallée makes this point, about the trickster archetype in the Greys.
There's a lot of theatricality involved in encounters with the Greys. Whitley Strieber once saw a Grey, sitting behind a desk in a 1940s suit, complete with, silk scarf, and he was, I think, lighting a cigarette that was dangling out of his, line for lips. And the whole scene, he said, was very comical, and a commentary on 1940s culture, which allegedly, these beings, they are associated with the Roswell incident, from 1947 onwards.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's a lot of theatricality, a lot of deception, which you see in the whole fairy folklore as well, going back to encounters with fairies and elves. They're very comical, but also somewhat malevolently deceptive in how they engage with human beings.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier Philip Corso, and I think it's only fair, I will link to it. Viewers can see in the upper right of their screen right now a link to an old interview I did with Colonel John Alexander, who met with Philip Corso and endeavored to research very carefully Corso's revolutionary claims that as an agent of the U.S. government, he was involved in transferring alien technology to U.S. corporations. Alexander has a lot to say about it because Corso is a very credible person. And in fact, I think the book had a introduction by U.S. Senator Strom Thurmond endorsing his veracity. But Alexander believes that it couldn't have happened.
Well, you mentioned Colonel Alexander, and thanks to you, I've had an opportunity to meet with John and speak with him on a number of occasions. And I also have a commentary in an essay I wrote that's included in Lovers of Sophia called Paranormal Phenomenology. I have a commentary on John Alexander's idea of precognitive sentient phenomena, PSP, precognitive sentient phenomena. His concept of the trickster sort of addressing us from out of the future.
Yeah.
And I set that in the context of Hegel's discussions in the Phenomenology of Spirit about how successive changes in art styles throughout various historical cultures are symptomatic of the evolution of consciousness, or they're demonstrations of the evolution of consciousness.
Yes.
And Hegel makes the claim that comedy is the highest art because it's the ultimate overcoming of alienation, of anything that would be separate from oneself in the face of which one would be fearful. And so I raised the question in that essay, what if that's true, but the comedic the theatrically comedic and absurd force of the trickster is also the most terrifying force at work in the world. In other words, is Hegel wrong to think that comedy as an art form is a corollary of a supremely rational society, a society where the irrational has been subsumed in the ultimate form of consciousness? Because the trickster is a manifestation of the unconscious. And in fact, in his study of flying saucers, Carl Jung suggested that the close encounter phenomenon was the revenge of the irrational against the predominance of scientific rationality. So that, the life force was invading our modern scientific mechanistic world.
Our own life force.
Our own life force in the form of these alleged aliens.
Yes.
And I think that's very true of these encounters with the Greys. Insofar as they represent humanity's ultimate resistance against total instrumentalization, which would be an evolutionary dead end. So what they're doing here is trying to get us to maximize our evolutionary potential and not wind up at the dead end that they have reached.
And as you say, if they are us from the future, it's fair to say this is something we're doing to ourselves.
I would say so, yes.
Jason Reza Jorjani, once again, a very enlightening conversation.
Been a pleasure discussing this with you, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much for visiting me here in Albuquerque, and I look forward to future visits and to probe these issues even deeper with you on another occasion.
Likewise, Jeffrey. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, and thank you for being with us.